thank you for joining us today for our first Learning Series webinar of 2025. I'm Dave Del Vecchio, VP of Marketing for Sourcepass, and today we're going to be talking about Power BI from Microsoft. I'm a 30-year veteran of the MSP space and head up our marketing team here. I'll be joined today by our special guest, Andrew Cummings from the Power BI Coach. For this subject matter, we brought in a subject matter expert who'll be able to lead you through both some kind of big picture perspectives of how it can be used, but provide some firsthand examples with some data sets. And so if you're looking for kind of an introduction to Power BI and the power that the tool actually helps bring your organization in putting data to use, you're in the right spot. I wanted to start today's session, though, with a little bit of shout out to Alan Bauman. For those of you who've attended these sessions in the past, Alan's been our kind of coordinator and leader of the Learning Series webinars in the first year that we've run them. He retired in December after a 35-year career in IT. So I just wanted to acknowledge thanks for Alan for the work that he did to get this program off the ground about a year ago. And I've got big shoes to fill in hosting these sessions. So for those of you that aren't fully aware, we actually run two different webinar series each month. The first, which is on the second Tuesday of the month typically, but we delayed it a little bit because of the holiday being the first, is our learning series. And this learning series is designed to be focusing on subject matter that is helping organizations get more value out of the investments already made. And in the predominantly corporate business environment, the ubiquity of the 365 platform has led us to design most of these sessions to date around various components of 365. One thing to note is that there are many different subscription types available. So some of you might have a 365 subscription that includes Power BI. Some might need to pay an add-on to get access to Power BI. If you have any questions on that front, talk to your Sourcepass Client Success Manager. They can help get you a readout on what you have subscribed to and what you might need in order to get the right people the licensing they need to take advantage of this platform. But we're here to help you if that's a question. Our second series of webinars is the digital transformation series. Those are designed to be more forward thinking on big picture discussion items that organizations should be thinking about IT in their future. We've got one of those coming up. Those are typically the fourth Wednesday of the month. And we have one coming up the end of this month where we're going to be talking about building an advanced security stack. So please join us for that as well. If you're looking to register for any of our events, you can go to our website and sourcepass.com/events will lead you to the events page where future events are listed for you to join and register for. And if you want to watch any of our webinars, we tend to post them 1 to 2 weeks after they've run live on our learning library. And so that's at sourcepass.com video-library. Couple of housekeeping items before I turn the floor over to Andrew. One is if you have questions, please use the Q&A. It should be enabled for this session. I'll be monitoring it in the background, but if it's relevant at the time, I'll break in, have Andrew address it, or we might save them for the end. Either way works. Please use the Q&A when a question pops into your head. Secondly, you're going to receive a prompt for a survey either via email after the session, or I think you should be able to find that in the chat as well. Once the session's over, feel free to fill out that survey, and we'd love your feedback on both this session and maybe future topics you'd like to have us cover. And so with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Andrew, who will come on stage and talk to you about Power BI. Take it away, Andrew.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session today, and I'm going to get right into the slides. So just bear with me 1 second. There we go. All right, so let me go into presentation mode here. All right, so we're here to talk about Microsoft Power BI today. As Dave mentioned, just a little bit about me. All I'm going to say to this is that I'm very passionate about Power BI and the whole platform, love data, and really helping organizations and people leverage their data assets to make informed and better decisions. As you're probably aware in your personal life and your work life, is that we're capturing more and more data at phenomenal rates. And this is what they call a digital transformation feedback loop. It all foundation based on data. If you're in your business life, you've got customers that you're serving. You're using information that you're collecting from your customers to help improve your products and services. When your products and services change, you're going and you're optimizing your operations to deliver those more effectively to your customers. And you can't do all of that without empowering your employees. So, and they're all a lot of interconnectedness. You think of anything that you do today, an online transaction, visiting your doctor, going out for a run and starting up your smartwatch. You're creating a digital and a data trail in everything that you do. And you want to make sure that you're using that information effectively. So a couple of statistics. It's interesting. I'm sure that this is evolving and changing over time, but essentially only 2% of all the data that I just mentioned that's being collected that is only 2% of it's actually being used effectively. There's probably more being used, but used effectively, it's a very small percentage. And we hope with tools like Power BI is that we'll be able to change that. A McKinsey report was able to identify through analysis that they did is that customer retention and getting new customers, you're 23 times more likely to do that if you're using your data effectively and using your data when you're making decisions to help your customers. And 85% of C-suite executives believe that data literacy is going to be a vital part to success in using the tools that you're given going forward. It'll be as important as being able to read and or use a computer. A few more statistics is that as humans, we're able to process visuals 60,000 times faster than you can read through text. And that's because of the way we're wired. We're wired to recognize patterns. We like effective communication. So the analogy of a picture's worth 1,000 words certainly fills in that. But you find in your personal life, business life, is that you need to disseminate and make decisions much quicker. And what better way to do that in having a visual that's going to help guide you. Real-time monitoring. So more and more, you're not waiting to the end of the month to figure out how you're doing with your month end. Your moment by moment, you're getting feedback in terms of how you're performing. And then making sure that you're improving your decision making. All right, so a little bit about Power BI. I want to spend most of the time on the demo today, but it's a business intelligence solution that you're able to transform, model, analyze, visualize, and share your business data with your target audiences. You can take unrelated information and data and make it in a more coherent data set, and then use visualization in interactive dashboards to highlight and give business insights. And as Dave mentioned, it's integrated within the 365 product line. And you can embed this Power BI dashboards and platforms in many of the tools that you have, Teams, Microsoft PowerPoint, etc. And why use Power BI? Well, it really enables you to quickly look at your data and get some insight that's going to drive your business decisions. Microsoft platform, when it comes to data, is one of the largest business intelligence clouds platforms out there. And for those that are collecting information that's confidential, so customer information, patient information, perhaps if you're in healthcare, it's secure, both from a physical perspective, but there's a lot that you can do in terms of protecting the privacy of information that you're sharing with different people. And This is a Gartner report. They do analysis on where different platforms are trending and how providers are able to execute. So this is looking at the data and analytics and BI platforms. And as you can see, it looks at completeness of vision and then the ability to execute on that vision. And Microsoft is right at the top of that in terms of being able to execute on their vision. And that's why it's so nice to know more about their Power BI and data platform. So a little bit more about Power BI is there's a lot of different data sources out there. You're maybe using some of these in your organization, Salesforce, Dynamics platform, SAP. Probably a lot of you are still using Excel or SQL Server, Access databases, chip surveys, etc. There's connectors that you can connect to all these different data sources in an efficient, effective way. And then you bring that data into Power BI Desktop. And there's a couple components. We'll go through it in the demo today, but there's a modeling component where you can transform and shape your data. And then there's further formula development that you can do. And then there's a visualization, going back to the slide in terms of being able to process visuals much more than reading text. So the visualization component, which makes up your dashboard. And then it's very accessible. There's a desktop, which is a free license to download and develop in. If you want to publish reports, that's where you get into some more of the licensing. And Dave's already talked a little bit about how you can learn more about that. The benefits of Power BI, we talked a little bit about this already, is the ability to consolidate different data sources. And automate it so it's not a manual process every time you need to run a report. You can connect real time to many of those data sources. And just with refreshing or having a schedule refreshes, you'll get up to the minute information. You can further enhance trend analysis and do forecasting, which is critical too, is having a little bit of a crystal ball to be able to look into the future in terms of what might happen based on what you've learned from the past. And then we talked a little bit on the previous screen as well, is more and more people are doing things from smartphones. Many run their business from their smartphone. It's very accessible across, whether it's a laptop, a tablet, a computer back at the office. You can access it through all the different platforms and channels. So I'm going to get into the live demo. I'm going to just do a bit of an intro to that, and then we're going to launch Power BI and go through the demo. So in our demo, it's we're going to be the VP of Sales is our target consumer of this dashboard, and he works for a fictitious company called Superstore. And they're an office retailer that does a lot of different office different office products that are required. And as a lead analyst, so that would be you, is you've been posed with these different questions in terms of looking at sales by region, looking at top performing regions, learning a little bit more in terms of order details, but then being able to use all that information to help inform business insights. And you'll end up with something that looks like this at the end. And as I mentioned before, you can see the screen on the left. That's sort of what it would look like on your computer or maybe your tablet. And then on the right, that's what it would look like on a smartphone. So it's very dynamic in terms of understanding which channel you're leveraging it. And it does the necessary adjustments to make sure that you're getting the best visualizations possible. All right, so I'm going to hop out of here and I'm going to bring Power BI over. All right, so this is what I referred to before called, it's a Power BI desktop. Very robust tool. So when you launch it, this is what you see. It gives you some quick connections to different data sources, but there's more. And some of the history in terms of ones that you've worked on in the past, so you can actually quickly access those. But I'm going to start with a blank report. All right, and this is what the developer canvas sort of looks like. I'm just going to go right in because I can explain a little bit more when we've added a data set. So I'll just talk a little bit about getting data into your dashboard or visualization tool. So you've got, again, a couple ones that are a little bit more common where they're a single click. But I'm going to go into get data and I'm going to click on more. Just to give you a sense in terms of all the different connectors that are available. There's hundreds of different connectors that are out there, but there's lots of options for ones that maybe you don't see on this list and being able to bring it in. So you can see they've got broken it down by different areas. This is the all. So many people, like I said, have their information in Excel. Some people might have it in a SharePoint folder with different files in there. But you can see it's quite a comprehensive list. You might be using Snowflake. You might have a data warehouse. You might be using Azure SQL Server, SharePoint Online List, the Dynamics platform that I mentioned before. Might be on GitHub. There's a PDF that you want to get information out of. So you can see it's a very comprehensive list here. But for today's demo, we're going to use an Excel workbook. So I'm just going to go and connect to that. It's going to ask me to find the data source so you can navigate to wherever you're storing it. Today we're going to use the Superstore orders data set, and I'm going to click on open. And that's going to present you with a screen, so it's connecting to it. Bear with me a second. All right. So here, if you have multiple tabs within the Excel spreadsheet, I only have one in this, like different worksheets. You can select multiple, but when you click on it, on the right-hand side, it's going to give you a little bit of a preview. It's a small preview in terms of the overall, but it gives you the ability, and I always recommend this whenever you're developing a dashboard, is if you can go in, take a look at your source data beforehand. But this also helps you a little bit so you can just scan across just to look at what you have in there before loading it into what they call your data model. So you've got some time information in terms of years, month, order date, ship date. You've got customer information in terms of names. You've got business segments. You've got location information with city, state, country, postal code. You've identified different markets and regions. So again, location-based information, which will help you with analysis. Obviously, you've got your employees that are actually making the sales. So you might want to use that for some feedback to the different reps to make sure that they're optimizing the use of the data and helping them make more sales. You've got information about your products. So your product IDs, your categories, subcategories, product names, and then some information about your sales in terms of the dollars, the quantity, any discount, any profits, the cost for shipping, and then a little bit more on the order in terms of its priority. So now you have a good sense of what's in the data. So I'm just going to load it into Power BI. And now I'll do a little bit now that the data is going in there. I will go through the lay of the desktop. So it's just taking a second to load here. It'll give you a little checkbox there. So you can see there's 8,000 rows in this data set. So that's the loading data. Again, I could have done it more quickly by clicking on Excel workbook, or if you have a SQL Server, you can click on that, go into it directly. You've got your panes over here on the right-hand side. So you can see here's the data that we just loaded. And if you click on this little drop down, you can see here's all the different data fields that we just looked at when we navigated in that little pop-up. So you can see the location information, some customer information, and then these little symbols here represent the type of data, numerical. You can see the dates have a little calendar beside it. It's just letting you know that it's a date type. It's very important in some of the calculations and how you use it to make sure that the data type is right, because sometimes that will impact your dashboard. And then here in the build section, you have lots of different suggestions in terms of different visualizations that you might want to create. And there's even more. You can click on these three buttons and you can go get more visuals. It takes you to a marketplace. There's some freebies out there that are offered by Microsoft, but also other third-party providers. And there's some that you have to pay for. They're a little bit more advanced. The key thing there is always read the small print because there's some things in terms of like what they get back in terms of if they're collecting to help improve their product. So just make sure that you're wary or informed in terms of what the agreement is when you use their different visualizations. And then there's a format section. So this changes based on what you select here. Right now, because we just have the canvas here, it's got the ability for us to set up different things on this page. So you've got the page information. So if you can change the name here, and then it will be reflective in the tab. There's different types of pages, which we won't get into a lot of detail today, but a lot of capability, because sometimes it's important. You see a visualization, you want to drill down into the detail and learn more because you see something is that there's the ability to create a drill through page, which gives you the option to click from that high level visualization into a row by row level of information with regards to that data that you're looking at. So there's, like I said, as you pick your different visualizations, is that this formatting page changes to reflect that visualization. All right, so we're VP of sales, we're a data analyst, and he's got some questions, so we want to be able to help him with that. So we're going to start off, we're going to create, add what we call a card visual. And I'll format it a little bit more. I just want to get the visuals on the screen for right now. So we're going to go back here, and these are our fields. So simply by dragging over sales as an example, right, it's going to give me information on sales. So I'm just going to put here total. So you can change the naming here, and it will be reflective in your label there. You might want to know how many orders. So you can drag it and you just drop it again. And I'm just going to put number of orders. All right. And maybe that it would be insightful to know at a high level the profit. So I'm going to drag that in as well. So now I've got three different components there. So I'm just going to do a quick update there, and then I'm going to go through some more of the navigation parts. But here you can see that this is now changed in terms of the formatting. So it's a specific formatting for the card visualization. So I'm going to go into my callout values, which is these numbers here, the 1.81 million in sales, 30K total quantity orders, and 236 plus K of profit. I'm going to put them in the center. I'm going to change the font to 25 instead. And then I can scroll the size. The other thing that some people might find helpful is snapping to grid. So you can put the grid lines in here, and it gives you a little bit of a cue. But the other thing too is you'll notice when I start moving some of the visualizations, there's things that pop up to help you with the alignment. So it's just a personal preference. So I've added the one visual. So this here is a report view, which is what we're on. If you want to see a table view, so you can go into here, right? And now you can see all that data, right? So this may be helpful too. And you've got some filters in here if you need to do a little bit of discovery, which might help inform what you do in terms of how you present the information. And then today, not as relevant, but if you have other tables that you want to bring in that you want to join together, is that there's this relationship part in your model. And what you can do is if you've got like a customer ID that's in your sales, but then you also have your customer record where you have more demographic information about the client or other things you want to inform, right? Is that you can link up your customer information and database with your orders database by linking on your customer ID. So it's very powerful in terms of how it connects the data, and it has significant impacts in terms of how it calculates the numbers that you're using. All right, so I've got my high-level visual. The next thing is they want some level of trend analysis. So I'm going to do what they call a line chart. And when you hover over, you'll notice that there's a little pop-up here, and it sort of explains what you're getting when you click on it. So I'm just going to click on the line chart. I'm going to bring it up here. So like I said, you can drag and you can see the line. So it's sort of telling me now that it's aligned here. And I'm going to stick with my sales. So I'm going to add my sales to my y-axis. I'm going to add my month to my x-axis. All right, and you can notice here that the sort order is, I'm going to change it to by month. And I'm going to do it in ascending. And you can see here, right, it's doing April through September. And that's because it's doing alphabetically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my data view. I'm going to select the month here, and you have the ability to sort it. So I'm going to sort it by month number, which is this. So this is a number value. So now it will use this when it's sorting on the chart. Right, so now you can see here it starts January and goes through to December. But this is your total. This is your aggregate sales. So I'm just going to double click on and change this again to total so we're consistent with our labeling. What I want to do is I want to see year over year, again, to help with the trends. So if I go here and I go into year, and I put that in my legend, now you can see, right, is you've got your 2015, your 2016, your 2017 data, right? And if you hover over, you can see there's a little pop-up so you can see, and you can put in other, like you could put in percentage difference, etc. in this little pop-up tooltip. But for right now, we'll just leave the numbers in there, but it's helpful to see. Now you can also add the data label on this by just simply clicking on that, but you can see it's a little bit busy. So maybe depending on the real estate, it might be better to hover over. Really, you're looking for the pattern. So I'm just going to turn that off, but you have that option to do that. Next is that having an understanding of maybe the segments might be helpful and inform some decisions. So sometimes you might want to use a pie chart or a donut chart, usually when there's a small number of variables in there. So with a segment, I think it's a smaller group. So I'm just going to add a segment to my legend, and I'm going to add sales again to my values. So now you can see there's a breakdown. You've got your segment legend. I'm going to turn the legend off because there's something we can do with the labeling just to give it a little bit more real estate to the actual visual. So when you go in here, you can see that there's detailed labels, right? So you can identify the position you want. I think in this case, the outside part. But what you can do here is you can just do the category, right? So it's just going to show you the category, or you might just do the data value. But a lot of times it's useful, especially if you turn off the legend, to go into all detailed labels. And that will give you a lot more information. And I'm going to go down here, I'm going to make that bold so you can see. But the other thing that's good, because sometimes percentages have multiple decimal places, which makes it a little bit hard to read. So you can actually go in on your percentage and set the number of decimals. So in this case, I'm going to do it to 0. And you might want to do for your units, it's in thousands of dollars, so that's probably okay. But you might want to, again, go 0 here, so it rounds up. Depending on the level of precision that you need in your visualization, will determine what you might want to do there. And then for the slices, for spacing, right, is you might want to make it a little bit bigger, because sometimes people like to put a high level number in here in terms of maybe that total number of sales in there. So we've got our sales now by segment. The other thing you want to know is a little bit more about some of the spatial information in terms of like what regions are the top sellers. So for that, I'm going to select a bar chart. Again, you can have different options there. Put that there. And again, I'm going to click on my sales in terms of my axes. And then for my y-axis, I'm going to do my regions. All right. This one I typically will put on a data label. Again, you can make adjustments if you've got different data labels in terms of the series. For the values, I'm going to go here again. And I'm going to put the units. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to actually change it to thousands. You can put it as none, depending again on your audience in terms of how deep do they want to go when it comes to precision. But there you can see now we've got by region. So you can see here very quickly that the Western region is much further ahead than some of the others. We also have location information on your customers. So it's maybe important to know where your customers are and where your offices are. So I'm going to create a map. There's different mapping options that you've got here. I'm going to just go with this map here today. And I'm going to create a map visualization. So the key thing here is you can see, remember how I mentioned that there's these symbols here beside that tell you the type of data that you're dealing with? Well, you can see here country. And when I click on country, it's going to tell you a little bit about information about that field. So you can see that this data category is uncategorized, but for it to recognize it for spatial analysis, I need to tell it that it's an actual physical location. So when you click on this, you've got drop downs. You can see a lot of spatial information there. I'm going to select this as being country. And you'll notice it'll put a little symbol beside it now that indicates that it's recognizing that it's location information. I'm going to do the same with state. I'm going to, so you've got your state province here. And then you might want to drill down to city or postal code. I'll also do it for city. All right. So now what I'm going to do is in your location values, you usually start at the top and work your way down. So I'm going to start with country. Oops. There we go. All right, I'm going to put the state next. Let's take a second. And then I'm going to put the city. Oh. There we go. And I'm going to add my sales to my bubble size here. All right. So you can see here it's got one bubble. So right now it's looking at just the country and total sales across the United States. So when you hover over that bubble, right, it's going to tell you it's the United States in terms of what that represents and then your total sales. I'm going to drill down. All right, so now it's looking at my hierarchy and it's taken me to a city. You have lots of ability here within the map settings itself. Is that you can change the type of visualization. Sometimes people like grayscale because it takes away, again, it depends on your audience and how they want to use the information. So if it's important, they're going to drill down into this and look for some insights in terms of like precise locations. If you do the road, right, is when you drill down into the cities and stuff like that, you start to see the road maps there as well. But there's these other controls that you can do where you've got auto zoom, but I'm going to put zoom buttons. And then there's a feature called lasso button. And what that allows you to do is you can select, highlight an area, And what it does is it will zoom in there, but it also, based on the area that you select, it can change these visualizations because the visualization will represent the area that you've lassoed. So very insightful in terms of what you can learn from that. So I'm just going to spend a minute here to move a couple things around and adjust the size of a few things. All right, there we go. I'll make this a little bit smaller. All right, I'll make this a little bit bigger. First, drag it over. There we go. All right. I'm going to add a little, so you might want to do some branding. So you might want to insert an image. So I'm going to go and get an image of my Superstore. All right, and I'm going to drag that up into the top corner there. There we go. And you might want to filter. So there's a couple different ways to filter. You can do it through the visualization, but you can also add filters. So there's this option here, which is called a slicer. It allows you to filter the information. So you may want to just very quickly by year be able to filter the data. And there's different options that you can use. Here it's a range, but what you can do in your slicer settings, and again, it depends on the type of data that you're filtering on. So if it's date-based, it gives you the ability to do a list. We're going to use a tile, but you can do between, less than or equal to, etc. So when you do the tile, it's a single button there that you can click on for each. And maybe we want to do it by sales rep. So you can copy and paste as well the different visuals. So I did a Control C, Control V. So the nice thing about that is if you've done some formatting to your filtering, is when you copy it, it will carry the filtering over. You just need to be mindful if you've put any specialized filters on this, the filters come over as well because it's a true copy and paste. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take and I'm going to add my reps. Now you might want to do it on if you have a large sales force, right? Is that this might not it might take up too much screen real estate. So for this case, what you might want to do is you might want to use a drop down. And then the other thing that you can do now that you've got a drop down, especially if you have a long list, like if we put our product categories there as an example, right, is you can do this little search. And what that does is when you go in here, if it's a long list, you can just start typing and it will narrow down the search results that you have there. So I'm just going to leave it like that for right now. But there's a lot of different options you can do with the filtering. The next piece that I wanted to do is there's another way to filter your data, and I'm just going to make these a little bit smaller for right now, and you'll understand in a second why. Is the visualization actually acts as a filter as well. So when you're in here, you can go, you select one of these visualizations, and you go into format. And there's this option called interact or edit interactions, because when you click on these, it actually, so if I click on home office right now, right, you can see that it changes. Here you've got what they call a highlighted filter. What we want to do is we want to do a complete filter. This is sometimes good when you're working in percentages because it shows how the different regions compare to the overall. So there's different use cases, but just for simplicity today, I'm just going to quickly change the interactions to a full filter. Here, just be a second, I think. Right, this one. Okay. Make this one small. All right. So now I'm just going to quickly format these. You may want to put a border on some of these for a bit of separation. Right, so I'll click on this one and this one and this one. So when you go in here, there's the size and style. So you're able to control it to a pixel level if you want. So you might want to make the height 320 is that you got the ability to do that. Oops. But here you can see you can change the background. So right now it's just a plain white. If you want to create a different color, but I'm going to just turn on the border. And when you go in here, when there's a drop down, it gives you the ability to then update some of the parameters associated with that. So I'm going to just make it a light gray because I don't want it to be too dark. It takes away from the visualization, but it does give you a little bit of separation. And the nice thing here that you'll notice is when you flip back and forth now between the different visualizations, because this part is common, right, is that it stays at that part. So it makes it very quick for you to make the change across the board. Now you can select multiple visuals at a time. It has a lasso effect as well. So I'm just going to, and before I forget, I'm going to turn off that the editing interactions because that's a little bit annoying. But now you can see that you've got a little bit of separation and a border between those. So now that we've changed the interaction, when I select your home office, right, it's doing a complete filter, right? So now these sales numbers are representing your home office across the board in terms of your year. If I just want to really hone in on 2016, right, all my visuals, so you can see your time series. This is now showing me 2016 as well as it was home office. The other nice thing, I'm just going to, if you click on it again, it deselects, bring everything back. Here is you can see the state of New York. So when I click on the state of New York, now it's showing me those same trends, your overall totals, your segments for that. It obviously falls in the Eastern region, so not a lot of insight there. But the other thing that's neat is on the map, but it applies on other areas as well. Just going to minimize this, is there's something called a tooltip. So you know how when you hover over, you see this? This is a tooltip that comes up. All right, so when I go into the map, oh, sorry. Oh, let's do it here. Is right now I've got my sales. Sorry. All right, there's a tooltip component, and what you can do is you can add different values. So what would happen is when I hover over here, like I mentioned before, you might want to see the percent difference. You would add that to the tooltip, and then it will show up in your pop-up. The other thing, because sometimes you have, again, the corporate branding, is that you might want to do some changes to your visualization in terms of colors. Now you have the ability to go in and update each of these lines independently if you want. So you can see that there's an all. If you want to see 2015 and you want to change the color, is that you're able to do that as well. But there's also this theme here. So there's many different themes. So when you click on this drop down, you can see different. So this tells you what you're currently using in the report. There's some accessible themes. So I know a lot of people for compliance purposes want to make sure it's accessible to people that have visual impairments. If you select one of these are known to be. So you can see here that they're easier for people to read that have visual impairments. And there's some that actually have some really nice colors, like, and you can see the difference in terms of what the layout and structure looks like. Again, if you select region and you hover over here, you can see California. So it gives you lots of different insights. And when you're ready, is you can save your work. And there's a lot more you can do with your dashboard. So I'm just going to do demo 2025 0115 and save. All right. And then when you're ready to share this information, so there's a lot too you can do here with filters. So when you go in here, you might want to say, don't show me any that have 0 sales or a certain level, is that you can filter these as well using this here. So you can see here's the breakdown. If you don't want to include, or if you just want to include consumer and corporate, you can do that filtering. This filter you can also make accessible to the people that are using the dashboard. Often people like to control how people are filtering, so they create these because sometimes they build some intelligence, but it allows you to format provide additional filters. But when it's ready, you can save it, and then you can go over into what they call a workspace. Some of you may have licensing to Power BI Report Server, which is an on-prem, but there's also the web services online. So this is a workspace example. So if I go into my workspace here, you can then upload the file, and there's different locations. So I'm just going to bring in the demo that we just did. And once you've got it in here, you can actually embed this in a PowerPoint presentation. So if you're making a lot of PowerPoint presentations where you need to bring in data for your customers or your internal staff, etc. And this is what this looks like in the visualization. You can turn off some of these extra items. It's just based on permissions in terms of what people can see. And then same level of interactivity. So if I want to see the southern regions, right, is it's honed in here on the map. And this is where you get that road network. So if it's important to see geographical boundaries, a road network can sometimes help with that. Here you can see the breakdown there. Oh, I forgot to do the, so you can see here, this is what it looks like when it's segmenting. But you can filter, so same level of interactivity, and then you can share this. You can put restrictions on in terms of permissions. You can even set something up where it's role-based. So an individual user logs in and you only want them to see their sales and maybe how they compare to the whole. Is you can do those sorts of things so that it basically becomes their personalized dashboard space. So I'm going to stop there. Like I said, you can embed this in Teams. You can embed it in other parts of the Microsoft ecosystem. But I'm going to hand it back to Dave just to sort of, if there's any Q&A or questions or any other dialogue that we want to have.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the depth of knowledge that you've shared with the audience. There are some questions in the Q&A. I want to take them out of sequence. The first question I'll ask you is on behalf of Igor, who asked, how would you compare Power BI to other solutions like Tableau?
Well, I've been a developer in both. Mind you, Tableau I haven't been in the last couple of years because I've exclusively moved over to Power BI. They're very similar. They're both great products. What I recall from Tableau versus Power BI, the ability to transform your data in that Power Query part that I showed you. Remember when we loaded in the data? There's a lot that you can do there in terms of transforming. So if you have data quality issues or you want to do other transformations, there's a lot more that you can do with Power BI, but they're both great products. I want to say that I believe Power BI, when it comes to like if cost-wise, is a little bit more cost-effective in terms of how their licensing works. But again, I'm going from memory. But there's a lot of great products out there. And at the end of the day, It's really about taking that underlying data and providing insights to people. I'm a huge fan of Power BI. Like I said, I developed in both. They do the same thing, but they do have a very different approach. So I find being an expert in both, and with the extensiveness and the ability to scale, like you can do things very simple, like what we've done today, but you can get really deep in terms. So in terms of as you learn, it really grows with you. I mean, the same could be said for Tableau, but I'd say the data preparation is a little bit stronger in Power BI. And if you're a Microsoft company, in terms of you're using a lot of the Microsoft tools, there's a lot more options in terms of embedding it and making it visible in many different spaces. I hope that helps.
That makes sense. We have a question here from Ian who asks, once you have a page like this built out, can it be saved as a template and have new data set with the same formatting dropped in?
So it's a great question. I like the idea of build and reuse. So you can copy templates in through that Power Query part where I was talking about, is you can parameterize what data set it's pointing to. So if you wanted to do like a different month or a different, as long as the structure is similar, is you can do a copy and paste and then just reconnect to your new data source and use some of the themes. Also, too, you can create, when I was showing you the color themes, there is the ability to create. So if you've got very specific colors that you use within your organization, is you can, and they don't align with one of the standard themes, you can always go in and create a custom theme. The other thing that you can do with Power BI, Dave, going back to the first question too, is when you create that data set. So if I go back to my workspace, right, you'll notice that there's two things. So there's your semantic model, which is your data set, and your report. I can actually share this data set and create different visualizations based on different needs. So you can do your modeling once and reuse that same data set and create different visualizations, or vice versa. You can create a visualization and point to different data sets. The only thing you need to be wary of is the structure needs to be similar, but you can cater different structures again through Power Query just to make sure there's that alignment. Hope that helps with that question.
Excellent. And then I see that the person who asked the question is no longer connected, but in case he checks out the recording for what he missed, I'll ask his question anyway. This is from Stephen Davis. Yeah. He said a roadblock he's experienced with Power BI is exporting a table of data to Excel. When he used Crystal Reports, he could list a table from a database and save as Excel as the raw data. Now, I asked for clarification where his source data that he was ingesting into the visualization tools in Power BI was coming from, and he didn't answer that question before he left the webinar. But is it possible to take the data that you're capturing in one of these widgets and actually export it into Excel?
Yeah, it's a good question. And people, I always challenge them a little bit, like, why do you want to put it back into Excel?
Right.
But I know that, but there's a couple options there. So I'll go to the first option. So there, you go into your table view, right? And remember, we had the orders table, right? And the nice thing is all the transformation that you've done to get it to this stage, right? And you can even apply a filter if you want. But what you do is you right click in here and you do copy table. You open up Excel and you do a Control V or you do paste and your presto, your data's in Excel. But the other thing too, like, is if I only wanted June as an example, and I don't know why I picked June, but if I do this filter and then do the same thing, copy table, right, is it will recognize that filter when you paste it into Excel. The other option you can do, and this sometimes can be turned off because a lot of times you don't know when you publish it to many different people, they might use it out of context. So sometimes you can, but what you can do here, I'll go into this. Oh, sorry. Here is you've got this little, when you click on those three dots beside the visual, is you've got this option to export. And when you export, it does it to a CSV by default, but you can always open that up and convert it into Excel. I think you might actually be able to, no, it's just a CSV. But it takes the underlying data that you created for this visual, and it will put it into a CSV file that you can use. So there's a couple different options in terms of if you've done that transformation and then want to bring it back into Excel, there's always that option.
Very cool. And I think that addresses most of the questions that were posed during the session. So I'm going to hijack your screen right now and
Sure.
just remind folks, as we talked about in the early part of the session, that we do have a digital transformation webinar coming up towards the end of this month. It's on building a complete technical security approach. So please register and join us for that by going to our events page or responding to the emails that we send out regarding that session. If you have any questions about this webinar or about Power BI, please feel free to reach out to us. Kat and I, Kat Irizarry, thank you very much. She's been helping us on the back end and helps coordinate sending out the invites and things to these sessions. We monitor the events at sourcepass.com email. We're happy to put you in touch with appropriate resource who'd be able to help address your questions. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. With that, Andrew, thank you very much for your time. This has been a great session. Hope everybody had a chance to take something away today from our session, and we look forward to joining us in future sessions.
Well, it's successful if everybody wants to learn a little bit more. So hopefully we gave you enough to whet your appetite and you're wanting to learn more. And maybe it'll be a future part of your learning series, a 201 version of this.
Very good.
Thank you, everybody.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Andrew.